the mental process that you have to put into problem solving and changing and fighting these people on the mats, like it really translates into like every single thing that you do. It's like for real chess with yourself.
It's human chess.
It's human chess, and it's dynamic problem solving. And I think once you learn the fundamentals of business, then it's, which I'm not a black belt by any stretch of the imagination, but then you become a great dynamic problem solver, which is what you need to pivot on things and try things. I failed. That didn't work. Okay, let's go in a different way. And so I think they marry each other quite well. Benefits that come out of jiu-jitsu if you're really in tune with running a business, your life in general.
Welcome to the Matthews Mentality Podcast. In this episode, we are joined by the Shawn Williams, 5th degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Renzo Gracie, and inventor of the Williams Guard?
Yeah, inventor, I guess.
Inventor. Yeah. So you're an inventor.
I am an inventor.
A good friend of mine, also my BJJ coach, so this is a special episode. He's trained with some of the world's foremost experts, is renowned for his commentary on the sport's most prestigious event, Flow Grappling, and is the founder of Renzo Gracie Nashville, where I frequent twice a week, sometimes. I got to go more. I got too many kids. Sometimes I just look at my wife. I say, we got too many kids. I got to focus right now. So Renzo Gracie Nashville, Shawn's Academy, and I can attest to this, has quickly become Nashville's premier destination for jiu-jitsu and kickboxing since opening over 3 years ago. So if you are in the Nashville area, you must come and learn under Shawn and his crew. And if you're in town visiting, whether it's for work, a convention, tourism, hitting up Broadway before you go drinking those $5 tall cans, come and see Shawn at Renzo Gracie. Shawn, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. And can I add before you go drinking? So it would be better for you as a person. Well, you did say before, but I'll stress that before.
I don't know. It's kind of like golf. Like a couple beers you get better, and then like 5 beers you start to deteriorate.
I think I get better with 5 or more.
I show up to every class 2 beers deep. No, I'm just joking. What's going on? What's new?
Same old, really. I have a pretty mundane life as far as like doing new things. I'm building the gym, building the competitors, building coaches.
Building a family.
Building a family is always number one. And so that's keeping me very busy. But we're about to hire a nanny.
Oh.
Which is going to be a game changer for us.
Families are like businesses. You got to scale, right?
You do, yeah.
Now, let me ask you, I'm going to talk about family later on, but I did want to ask you this question. Is it just me? It seems like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has exploded in the last decade. And you are the expert. You are much more qualified than me to speak on this. So I want to ask you, just to start, why all of a sudden, it seems like, 4 or 5 years ago, you start hearing the words Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you start hearing people speak about it, people talk about not just the sport, but the benefits. Like, where did this come from?
Yeah, it's true. It is. It's exploding. When I started, people thought I was doing karate. For a long time, they had no idea what jiu-jitsu was. I said, "Oh, I do jiu-jitsu. What belt are you?" Blue. They were, oh God, I just can't. Thinking that I'm like this, just in my mirror punching like this, and that was in '96, and then to today, where some of the biggest tournament has 10,000 competitors, which is insane. I mean, when you think about a competition, if on an average weekend you're spending close to maybe $1,000 if you're competing, because you're buying your entrance fee for $150 and you're getting a hotel in Vegas and you're the whole weekend. So to have 10,000 competitors that are willing to shell out that type of money just to go compete in something.
And what tournament is that?
That's the Master Worlds. That's the Master World Championship. So World Championships from 30 plus. Essentially, is now turned into the biggest tournament, which says that more people are practicing it and they're just not just watching it. So I think UFC is sort of the underlying reason why.
I agree.
I mean, that's sort of a marketing machine for
and
jiu-jitsu.
UFC's exploded in popularity.
Yeah, it has. It's especially with Ultimate Fighter, right? So early on when we had the guys fighting, like Matt Serra's fighting in the UFC, you'd go in and it'd just be crickets in the audience. There's 3,000 people in the audience, and if whatever free tickets they could give away, to now it's packed, 20,000 raging maniac fans,
and the again, I was a little younger, but when UFC was really first getting rolling, the Gracie family, which we'll talk about, dominated, and like people didn't, and you tell me, but people had no idea what was happening. I mean, these big fighters, much stronger strikers, maybe wrestling background, they'd go against. Was it Hoist?
Yeah, Hoist.
Back in the, he was still wearing a gi.
Yeah,
I don't even think there were gloves.
No, totally bare knuckle. They could headbutt. Everything was the only thing that I think wasn't allowed were eye pokes and fish hooking. I mean, there were even punches to the groin. You could do almost anything.
But the BJJ guys came in and they just started winning. And then I think everybody, especially as the sport became more serious, respectfully said, I have to have some foundation in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it became very apparent early on, like you need some sort of good grappling with submissions. Not because the wrestlers entered sort of second, but what they had lacked were the submission skills. So that's where it became married to this. Now it's sort of a hybrid. Hey, grappling is one of the kings.
So, I've heard Dana White speak about, as it relates to kids, like put your kids in jiu-jitsu would be the best thing for them. I think Jocko Willink is a big promoter of the sport.
Yeah.
Why Brazilian jiu-jitsu? In your opinion, what is it about that sport or that martial arts focus that's so beneficial for young kids?
It's organized, so it has grappling, which I think is natural for kids. It may not be. I have a funny sort of take on kids and jiu-jitsu. I feel like they should really have very little pressure. I think kids in general, but very little pressure early on, because it's kind of hard for kids to actually like it in the beginning. I mean, when the kids that like it, but it's great for them because it's grappling, and you learn to control someone that knows how to grapple. Somebody who knows how to grapple versus somebody who doesn't, it is literally like taking candy from a baby. And most of the confrontations you're going to have in school are going to have some sort of grappling component, or could very easily have a grappling component. So I think it's for self-defense. I think it's the number one for unarmed combat, self-defense combat for kids. Is if they're getting bullied. I mean, then jiu-jitsu is a pretty good equalizer. And then it's organized. So there's a method to it. There's a system to it. There's a beginning, an end. There's progression. It's got all the sort of the things that karate had a long time ago for kids: discipline, respect, progression. But now it's something that's more efficient in nature I believe it for self-defense. And then it can go in, and you can go off to whatever you'd like for kids. I mean, there's competitions, there's all sorts of great benefits mentally for kids. So I think that's primarily the reason why. It gives them a real answer to self-defense.
And jiu-jitsu also is to some degree a neutralizer of size, correct?
It is, especially, again, when someone knows something versus someone who doesn't. Size has a lot less to do with how you can handle someone.
And so what you have kids, do they do jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, my oldest son comes in and out. He's 6.5, and he did it for a little while, didn't want to do it. Now he's getting all fired up again, like, let's go do some jiu-jitsu. That's perfect. Let's do it. So I'm very relaxed with him. I know Matt Serra is the same. I spoke with him for a long time. He's got 3 girls, and they're all doing jiu-jitsu, and so the oldest one is crushing it. It looks like a little Matt Serra at a tournament. Like, geez, man, it looks like your dad. But very relaxed in the way that he brought them in, and that's sort of my approach as well. I feel like kids early on just need athleticism. And I will tell you, my 8-month-old girl seems to have like
you haven't put her in?
Yeah, she's got like an insane guard already. She's like uses her feet really well.
I like her dad. Yeah. So talk to me about the studio. Talk to me about you moved here 3 years ago. Yeah. You started up Renzo Gracie Nashville. What does that look like?
Yep, we moved here right before the pandemic and sat that year out, of course, like everyone else. And near the end of that, I said, hey, I got to get something going. So we found a space that was sizable for that time, because I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. I don't think anybody was sure what was going to happen. So I found a smaller studio in Brentwood, still located there, and I just started. I opened classes and had some friends already here. A former student of mine that was here already, so he started coming. People just started showing up, and then we organized classes, and it just took off. And it's we're growing like crazy. I mean, we've sort of essentially outgrown the spot, but not bad for business, but for space. I mean, it's packed, it's tight.
Yeah.
This is my fourth gym, so the business of it isn't difficult for me at this point. And as a matter of fact, I focused a lot more on some different things on this one actually than just the raw business of growing a martial arts school. So
we'll talk about the business, but let me take some steps back. Where did you grow up?
Indiana. So I was born in a very small town near Bluffton, Indiana. I was born in Bluffton, and we lived out in the boonies. I lived in for the beginning of my childhood in a place called Markle, Indiana, which is like there's 900 people in there. It's a very, very small town. Raised by single mom. So it was my brother and I raised by my mom, and my grandparents and my grandfather had a pretty big role, I guess, as a sort of a father role. In my first half of my life until she married my stepdad, and then we moved out to the boonies in the country, and so I was 12 years old living in the boonies and having a good time.
Is your brother older or younger?
He's older, so he's 3 years older, beat the bejesus out of me for majority.
Until you learned BJJ.
That's right. And what's funny is I sort of followed in his footsteps. I think a lot of little brothers look up to their big brother. And so he boxed early on, swam. I was a swimmer, sort of followed in his footsteps for swimming. And then his boxing he did some light boxing at the PAL Club in one of the places that we moved kind of all around until we lived in Markle. So that sort of, he liked to fight. He actually really liked to fight. Like not to train so much, but just like he likes like fighting.
He's a fighter.
Yeah, he was a fighter, and so he led me to start wanting to do karate. That was the only thing that existed in that time was just striking. So, we did karate out of a book. We was trained in the summer. I remember that was the first like sort of training that I did was
it to learn how to fight so you could beat up bullies? Like, what was the motivation?
No, I didn't have any motivation for fighting. I just thought it was cool and fun. He certainly probably did. I mean, he's a little bit of a different personality than I am. Not so calm-natured. Just more aggressive in nature. And so I have no idea whether that was instilled in him since he was a little kid, because my mom and real dad were divorced when he was 3, right? So he probably had
some.
Yeah, he probably was around when I was, and I was 1. I didn't know any different. I don't even know the guy, but that probably had a role to play on how his behavior was.
So your mom and dad got divorced. That wasn't very common at the time, right?
No.
So yeah, especially for him being a little bit older. But I assume that was hard on you guys, right?
I think so. I mean, I never really felt that. I mean, my mom was very young, so she was 16 and 19 when she had us, so exceptionally young, really, really young. And so she was always very supportive and happy, and so I never really felt any different. I didn't even think about, my grandpa was around, so he would, we started watching scary movies when I was 6, and do things like that. He would babysit for us. So I really never thought about it until later in life, really. Like now that I'm a father, I'm like, oh man, like I don't actually know. So some of this stuff for me is, yeah, I have. I went and met him when I was 17. Yeah.
How was that?
Not so great, right? Not so great. I went. I was pretty pissed that he never paid support or anything. So I was actually quite pissed. So I went to meet him and collect, essentially. It's like kind of that kind of meeting.
Did you know jiu-jitsu yet?
No, but I was pretty damn good at karate by then. I was doing striking, started at 12, and I went into structured karate, and but so was he. He was actually heavyweight boxing champion of Georgia. So he that was, I guess, in the blood, so to speak.
Golden gloves?
I don't know. No, he boxed in the Army. So, and he had a karate background, and so I guess it was just in the blood. And so
it's interesting. My grandfather was a Golden Gloves boxing champion of Georgia.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa. That's
when he was in the Army.
Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's wild.
That is wild.
Maybe they fought each other.
They might have. Probably might have been in the late 60s, early 70s. I'm not sure.
My grandfather's a little older.
A little than that, maybe.
Yeah, that's wild. So you went and saw him.
I did, and it was sort of it was an odd. Like I didn't have any feelings towards him. I didn't know him, but it was odd to see him because he does look like from this way, from
like you.
Yeah, from like the nose
and
up.
There was no Facebook back then. Like it was kind of hard. Like you might have had a picture of him, but
Yeah. I don't even know if I don't even think my mom had a picture of him back then.
How'd you track him down?
Through a lawyer. We looked up, I've got him. I had made contact with him, not me, but the lawyer had made contact with him. And then so he just like started not paying what he was agreed to pay. So I went up to collect.
How'd it
And
go?
it was fine. He was very nice, or and somewhat apologetic. But and I don't have any mal feelings except for that. Like I wasn't towards him as a father, but it was hit towards him for the support of my mom. That's what I was like, hey man, like that's not cool. Like we went through our upbringing and you should have been doing this. But that's, yeah.
Was your brother with you when you did this?
No, he didn't want anything to do with that.
Him being the bigger hothead.
Yes, maybe.
So you started striking and karate at 12?
Yeah, at 12, and then into like by 13, I was into the local dojo, which was a very, very small dojo in Markle.
Was it like
Indiana.
in a strip center?
No, it was. So there was no strip centers in Markle. There was like a bar and a mechanic and a grocery store and some other buildings. And so the teachers that we had actually had 6 teachers, sort of like where they just got together. And there were probably 6 to 7 students of us. It was one of my best friend and I and a couple of other stragglers went in, and it was actually quite good because it was not real formal. We had a tow truck operator was one of my main teacher, and then there was a corrections officer who was my second main teacher, and then there was a Taekwondo guy, another type of karate guy, and so they sort of did it, I think, to keep themselves sharp. I mean, tow truck operator in the boonies is sort of a rough job. I mean, that's a scary job. Correction officer in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is the nearest big town, that's a pretty sketchy, they got a sketchy element in Fort Wayne. So I tend to think that they just kept themselves in shape. We sparred a lot with open finger gloves, interestingly enough. Oh. We wore mouthpieces, had open finger gloves, and we could take each other down, which was sort of very
novel concept at the time.
Ahead of their time, and just the focus was whoever was on top was the winner if we put each other down.
And was this something you just like became obsessed with and were manic in your pursuit, or was this just one of many things you did at the time?
Yeah, it was. I swam competitively, but I think I liked that the best, and just the training and the, I guess, efficiency of it. I don't really know, but it just hit home with me, all the different training that we did. And
did you compete in tournaments?
I did 2 karate tournaments in my life, and I wasn't a big fan of the competitive side back then. I got disqualified for kicking somebody in the knee, and we didn't really go over any rules. I walked into this thing completely green, not having any idea what rules were.
It's a low kick.
Yeah, and they were just like,
it.
here's where you score. You got to score 3 points on this guy before he scores 3 points on you. You just got to hit him first. And I was like, okay, I'll try. And I got disqualified. So that didn't go very well. And then the forms I just didn't really care for at all. Katas and things like this. I thought they were cool, but I didn't like the competition of just yelling as loud as I could. So that was sort of my end of my competition. There wasn't full contact. It was point fighting. And I didn't have any leadership to say, maybe let's go try this kind of, it's just on my own, all on my own.
So karate, okay, swimming, any other sports as a kid?
I did them all. I mean, I did soccer, football. Football got ended my 8th grade year. I got picked, you have the coaching staff or whatnot, whatever. They're high school teachers, right? So it was on a play at the end of the day, and it was just sort of a screw around play where I was generally a defensive end. So they had me play running back, and they hiked the ball to me, and I was supposed to throw it. And there were no line, no nothing. It was just a play, and some guy came around the back of me, lifted me up, because I didn't even know he was behind me because there's no defense, lifted me up and put me on my shoulder and just shattered my collarbone, broke my collarbone. And so that was sort of the end of I was like, I'm not big. and it's not going to be. I'm not going to be a professional football player. So that was the end of that. And my swim coach was all ticked off because I did swim very competitively at that age. So I just went into swimming at that point, and just focused on swimming.
How were you as a student?
I think really good. I mean, I was on honor roll. Something I think that when I get something, I want to do my best at it. If I
You've always been like that?
Always since kindergarten, maybe even before. It's just anything that I want to do, I always try to do my best at.
So you never like half-ass anything?
No, the only thing I ever sort of half-assed was this job I really hated when I first moved to New York. But even then, I still did a decent job until I quit.
What was the job?
It was an inventory specialist job.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was completely awful, man.
I didn't know where you go with that.
It was no, that wasn't
Male
it was,
exotic dancer.
Well, I probably would have tried hard at that. I mean,
I didn't know. You didn't say the job, so I was like, I don't know what the job is.
Yeah, I mean, the harder you work at that, that would have been a
Yeah,
very lucrative career. Maybe
it's a tip-based job.
Yeah. But no, this was it's a horrible job, and it was a calculator.
Other than inventory specialist, you go hard.
Yeah, always.
So, what did high school look like for you? What was your life like, and what were you like?
Yeah, I got along with everybody. I was the guy that just had I was pretty relaxed in nature. Got along with everyone in high school. High school was small. I think there were there were 160 kids in my graduating class. It was a very small high school, sort of small town, everything, right? The popular kids, the not popular kids. I was somewhere in the middle where I got along with everybody.
Did people know not to mess with you because you're striking?
Yeah, they did. They did, and not that was something that I even tried. You know,
they just knew.
Yeah, they did. I got in a couple fights, and it wasn't even that it didn't go particularly great, but it didn't go bad either. And so then, people, oh wow, there was one fight in 8th grade. I got into the whole locker room filled up, like it was the entire locker room was full. When I looked around, I was like, geez, this is the entire locker room is full. So that definitely made a little bit of a difference, I think, in the beginning. But I didn't look for trouble at all. My brother, on the other hand, you look at him sideways, he's knocking you out. Oh, me, on the other hand, like I would try to talk to you. I'd be, hey, what's the problem?
Yeah. You're a nice guy. You got a nice personality. Yes. What good grades throughout high school?
Yeah, good grades, honor roll the whole time. Same in college. Went to college, Dean's List.
Where'd you go to college?
A bit of a mix. So I went to IPFW, which is a branch of Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne, just because when I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself. I worked in a factory. I had no idea.
I took high school or college?
I graduated high school.
Okay.
Yeah, I just literally had no idea. The first thing I wanted to do was a comic book artist and an oceanographer. Those are the two things that I had some sort of interest in besides martial arts. So I literally didn't know. So I worked and I went to IPFW and started to play hockey. So when I was about 5 or 6, I wanted to play ice hockey. Like there was a calling. I went to see my uncle play. He was in an adult league, and I saw a bunch of kids playing, and I literally was like, I want to do that. But my mom could afford it because it was just her with 2 of us. So she just had no idea how to do that. It was far away. So I didn't do that. So when I got into late high school, I started skating. So it became like, now I can actually drive myself to play ice hockey. I'm going to try. I'm going to do that. So I played on the club team, and that's actually what took me to upstate New York afterwards.
I was going to ask, yeah.
When that's kind of like everything. I really started to like it, so I just went bonkers. I went to like skating camps. I was the only adult in a bunch of kids' power skating camps because I got to learn how to do this.
Just checking kids.
Yeah. There's just like 1 8 and 19-year-old with a bunch of 5-year-olds learn how to skate.
Oh my gosh.
But I used to drive 2.5 hours just to go play one way there and back, and I just really enjoyed it. So, and fortunately, there was a team in Fort Wayne called Fort Wayne Comets, and I would get to play at the end of their practices and mix a little bit. And I just thought, well, this is really fun. I love this. Maybe I should just go try to play Division III because maybe that's something I could get in on. So that was the original reason why I went to upstate New York to Cortland before I even moved to New York City, was to do that. And
look, before we get, I want to explore that further, but before I get, you had mentioned you couldn't really play hockey as a kid because the economic to find it. You guys didn't have the money. You grew up pretty poor?
I would say, yeah. I mean, it was my mom by herself.
What'd your mom do?
She worked at a medical office. You know, there was a medical office there in town, and she did some sort of insurance coding. I don't know if that's what she did back then, but it was a medical office in town, and there was also a factory in town. So she worked at one of the other places when I was a kid, and my brother and I just, you know, her doing her best with no help. So. Yeah, we didn't have.
Was that hard?
Anything. It wasn't for me at the time because I didn't know any different. I didn't, you know, every Christmas, I would assume she was. I never asked her, but I assume she was a great budgeter because like Christmas was always like, whoa, how do we get all this cool stuff? But then, you know, the rest of the year where I'm outside playing in the dirt or making. I like baseball too, so I used to pitch and I used to. Okay, there's an old tire I can throw a ball through for 8 hours by myself and into the barn. And so I think it was actually quite good for me because I didn't have any distractions. I mean, we barely had, we had an Atari, but you know, back then was a different time, right? Yeah. We didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have, we had basic TV, and that was forever. I mean, the first time I never had air conditioning ever. I moved out of the house. I moved away when I was 18, and never in the hottest of summers in Indiana, we just couldn't afford air conditioning. So, but I think it was actually good. I think it taught me grit and perseverance, and yeah. And she was very supportive. That was one thing. She may not have been able to lead me, but she never said no to anything unless it was for financial reasons. Yeah.
And so you go to college in New York, you said?
Yeah, I went to upstate New York after IPFW to Cortland State for 1 year, and it was to try out for their team. They were actually which I didn't know. I drove all the way to this place called Oswego, New York, which is way up by Canada. I reached out to Cortland State's hockey team. They said, hey, we're going to be playing in Oswego on this winter day, and I was like, I'm going. I'm going to go watch this team. See if I can skate with them. So I drove all the way up there. Thought, well, and Oswego was even better than Cortland at that time. So Oswego shellacked them. I'm like, well, I could never play for Oswego, but maybe I could play for Cortland. Like, I actually went up to look at Oswego because they were very, very good, and saw that Cortland was like, yeah, I could probably get on their team. I don't think I can get on that team because I had taught myself how to play hockey. So then I rerouted. Went to Cortland and reached out to them, and they were like, yeah, we'd love to have you come try out. So I said, oh, all right. And I applied for Cortland State School, got in, and walked into dryland training.
How'd it go?
Horrible. I mean, it was one of the hardest that I'd ever trained. Because they had a beastly assistant coach that ran dryland. So we were training 4 hours a day. I was probably in the best shape I had ever been in my life. And I think swimming helped that because it's just such a good lung capacity. Skating wise, I was getting better quite quickly because when you first learn something, you get better quite quickly. But I failed, and so that I was like, I'm not going to make this tryout. I'm not going to make it. I got the flu the day before tryouts. And probably from stress, right? I think it was probably more stress-induced than anything else. Got the flu and gave myself an out. And I was like, I'm 102-degree fever, feel like crap, not going to the tryouts. I'm not even going to go. And so I didn't go. And like some of my teammates that made the team were like, where did you go? Where when I showed up for school the next day, where did you go? I'm like, man, I was like really sick. You would have had my spot. Like I made it, you would have made it. I made it because you weren't there. And I'm like, oh. So the coach had a big talk with me after and said, hey, why don't you hang around and skate the rest of the year on the club team? You're gonna play next year. I don't know why. And I was like, I was just sick. I never told anybody, right? I think this might be the first time I've ever told anybody this story except my wife. And I said, okay, maybe I'll do that. But I was pretty let down on myself for actually not going through.
I tell people all the time, the worst thing you can feel is regret.
That's right? It, yeah. And so I was trying to decide, like, do I want to do this again, or do I want to invest my time in skating? And that's the time I saw Renzo Gracie fight on TV. Like literally on fall break, a month after that, I saw him fight on TV. This is in 1995, and I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm doing that because it was already one of probably my most passionate love was martial arts. Ahead of hockey, because I mean I loved hockey, but like that I've been doing for a long time. So I saw him fight on TV and was like, how am I gonna do that? And then it took me on a whole another route.
So you did get sick.
Oh yeah. I was legitimately 102,
sick.
Like hardly could get out of bed that day.
And you kind of touched on this. Do you think some of that had to do with maybe it's like a psychosomatic thing, like the pressure and the stress of having this big tryout coming up?
Yeah, I think so. I like to take responsibility for my mess ups.
At that age, did you? Or is that more?
I've always been pretty responsible in nature. If I screw up, I'll say. I think I've even from a very young age been able to
take ownership.
Yeah, take ownership and.
But
reflect.
I guess my question is, could you have tried out?
I probably could have. I mean, it was hard for me to get it out of bed, but I mean, I've competed in jiu-jitsu with I tore the muscle off my bone and still finished and it competed.
Did you know throughout that day and the day after, especially when your friends were like, where'd you go? You could have made the team, that you could have pushed through, and did that just eat away at you?
Yeah, it did. I think that was, it took me a little while to get out of that. And I think it was probably pretty lucky that that Renzo fought on TV like immediately after that. Not long anyway, because it gave me sort of a wake up, like shake your head.
That's part of the reason I'm asking the question is because everybody, myself included, we're all gonna let ourselves down in a moment. I don't know if anyone goes through life never, kind of falling short in the moment. And so it sounds like you were able to kind of dig yourself out or pull yourself out of that mental rut maybe you were in. And again, as it's hard. It's hard on you when you have regret and you feel like you let yourself or you let others down. And in my opinion, a lot of people that puts them in a dark place, and it takes a long time, years, and sometimes never get out of it. They never overcome that feeling of regret and the feeling of failure of like, man, I blew it. But it sounds like you pivoted quick.
Yeah, I think I pivoted relatively quickly. And there's, because I really never thought any more about it. I mean, I still love hockey, but once I started training in jiu-jitsu, it really just fell off very, very quickly. It's something that I was like, this is really what I was born to do. You know, I was not born to play ice hockey. This is what I was born to do.
It felt more natural.
Way more natural.
All right,
yeah.
so you're watching on TV?
Yeah, we went in, it was an October winter break. I drove home to Indiana to with a bunch of the karate buddies that I had, and we were like, hey, there's going to be this MMA thing. Let's watch it. And it was called World Combat Championship. It's very famous because Renzo stepped on one of this guy's heads in the fight, and he fought 3 times.
You can do that?
You can't do that, but he did it anyway. It was a judo guy, and I got that. Funny enough, I was able to get the story from Renzo's mouth eventually. I didn't know at the time, but. Yeah, the guy was being very, very disrespectful, having his people call his hotel late at night. And so, yeah, saying stuff about his wife and all kinds of threats and everything. So when they fought after he put him unconscious, he stepped on his head and the back of his head. But he just fought so much different than Hoist. So I had seen Hoist fight. And so that was always like, man, this jiu-jitsu stuff is crazy. Yeah. I saw VHS tape 1993 of UFC 2. That's how jiu-jitsu even entered into my mind of like, what the heck is this?
What is this?
Yeah, what is this? I was excited because there's a karate guy. We didn't know the results either. Even though it was on VHS, my friend brought it over and said, hey, I haven't watched this. Let's just watch it like it's live. I'm like, great, okay, let's do this. And there was a karate guy. I'm like, dude, that karate guy's gonna win this whole tournament. He just got destroyed by Hoist. I was like, oh.
Was he wearing a gi?
What was this? Yeah.
He
strangled him. He took him down.
Just got a hold of that gi.
Double legged him, took him down, strangled him from the back, and it was over in like a minute and a half. I'm like, oh geez, man, what the what am I doing? Wasting my
spent the last
time.
5 years in
Yeah, man.
karate.
What am I wasting my time on? Look at this little dude. So that was exactly how jiu-jitsu actually even came into my mind. So then when I saw Renzo fight, that's, I think, why I pivoted so quickly, is that I knew that this was effective already. And so when I saw him fight, he just fought so much different than Royce. He looked he looked like he was a striker too. He was playing on his feet. He was bobbing and weaving. He was striking.
Yeah.
He was shooting double legs. He wasn't in a gi just like kicking with his lead foot. He was actually punching and kicking. And then when he would put people down, I mean, he was ruthless. He would elbow the bejesus out of them. Whereas like a guy like Royce would just, take his time and strangle people. He really didn't strike that often, and even if his striking it was usually from the bottom to open them up. Or as Renzo, when he put that people down, he would get on top and unleash fury. And wow, this dude is way different.
Before we talk about how you came to train under Renzo, could you just educate the audience? Almost everyone's probably heard of the Gracie family, and what you know about the Gracie family. Like, who are the Gracies? What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Where does it come from?
Yeah, of course. So the Gracie family is this massive, massive family out of Brazil, and as the story goes, because there's obviously more than one story of the Gracies with just one sect of jiu-jitsu. The Carlos, who was sort of the founder of modern day jiu-jitsu or Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and what has is also called Gracie jiu-jitsu. It's the same, like that we can talk about in a minute, but how well they branded Gracie jiu-jitsu versus Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But they learned from a Japanese guy essentially in Brazil very early on, and then they kind of took that and ran with it for all intents and purposes, because they didn't train that long with that fella, and their sort of family over generations took it into where I think is into fighting, because Brazil is pretty rough. I mean, even when I went, it's rough. It's like you had sort of felt like lawlessness. Well, you grow up in that, you can fight all the time. It's like fighting is just a part of their culture. And so I think that's primarily, these are just my thoughts, is why the family progressed the way that they did, towards fighting than just jiu-jitsu as a sport, because they did fight, and Renzo especially.
Well, these are like practical skills.
Yeah, they are life skills essentially, and it's just like swimming for us. It's like, you're fighting in the street all the time because you can in Brazil, and sometimes it's necessary, and protect yourself. And through that, I think, is what led to the evolution from the Gracies into the UFC or other fighting events. I think that's kind of why they are as popular as they are. I know there are other people practicing jiu-jitsu, but they I believe just fought more than a lot of the other people.
And so was Carlos the father to like Renzo, Rickson?
So Carlos was the father of Helio. So Helio or Elio was sort of the father of Royce, Rickson, Royler. I mean, there were more, Holker, there were others, but the most...
All with R's, but it's pronounced with an H.
Right. It's a strong letter in Brazil. So Helio was the father of Royce and Rickson and Royler, who were the three, most prominent figures out of that side. And then there were brothers to Helio, like Carlson, who had a whole nother sect. And so Carlson...
It's like branches.
Yeah, it was branches. And Renzo's father, Hobson, sort of had his branch, which was Renzo. And I think that... And so, there were these like branches of jiu-jitsu, and even
these guys are cousins now.
Yeah, cousins, and even their jiu-jitsu was different. It looked different. It was different, and so I think that's where Renzo came out and shined. Is that like the sect of jiu-jitsu, and this is no way in any shape or form disrespectful to anybody, any of the Gracies or anything like this, but the sect that came out of like, Helio's lineage, besides Rickson, it was sort of very guardish, a lot of guard, a lot of self-defense, a lot of, sort of cat and mouse game. Hickson was a lot different because he was physical. He was very, very physical.
big,
Oh, he was big for his day. I think he was very athletic for his day. So you watch him fight, and he's putting people down, mounting them, and they're not getting up, and then he's strangling them from the behind. But the other ones from that family were essentially like more guard players on their back. Carlson had a similar sort of style as Hickson. Like when he fought, it was very aggressive, top pressure, top heavy, and then made a bunch of people off that sect. And then Renzo is like a great balance of all of it. He was small when he was fighting all the time. He's only 145 pounds when he grew up. But they say his family members all say as well, he was the one who fought more than everyone else in the family. So
was that just because of his personality?
I think so. He's a fighter. He is definitely a fighter. He's loves a challenge, I think. And so his jiu-jitsu was just unbelievably efficient, but he was good everywhere, and he just wanted to learn everything. I mean, he liked wrestling, he liked striking, he liked everything, like top, bottom, whatever it is, whatever worked, he sort of took on.
So you see him on this, VHS on TV, and what happens? You say, I have to go learn with that guy?
Yeah.
That guy?
I didn't know, but I was like, wow, that guy, I want to do jiu-jitsu. So I started researching jiu-jitsu. I didn't know anything really about Renzo. I just knew that I want to do jiu-jitsu. So I'm going to start researching, and I actually was looking at Hickson School in California and the Gracie Academy, which was in California, which is where Hoist was at that time. Horion, Hoist, Hoyler were all at the Gracie Academy. And Hickson was essentially there for a short time. When I started researching, I think he left a little after that. And then I'm reading through Black Belt Magazine. Black Belt Magazine at that time was like the epitome of like, if you're a martial artist, you need Black Belt. It's the cheesiest magazine ever. I mean, ninjas on the cover, like all these fun guys.
Rex Kwon Do.
That's right. So I flipping through the page one day, and then there was an ad. Renzo Gracie and this guy named Craig Kukuk were opening a school in New York City. I'm like, what? I'm right here. I'm just like 2 hours away, 3 hours away driving. I got to go check this out. So I actually went home after the first year of college and drove out to New York City to meet him in the middle of the summer of 96.
How was that first meeting?
Oh, he's an incredible human being. I mean, he just is very welcoming. So he was welcoming right away. When I walked up there, there's a bunch of people training, and he was like, "Hey, champ!" He calls everybody champ when he first meets. "Hey, champ, come on in." He's just an unbelievable person. So made me feel at home right away. Was happy that I came all the way from Indiana to do that, and I was like, well, yeah, just based on how he fought and who he is, I'm coming here. So I just started to apply schools in New York City. I'm like, well, I'm going to have to borrow money to live in New York City. Yeah. How can I borrow money? Oh, I can go to college. I can go to college and borrow the max amount and use that as part of my living in accordance with. I would never do that. Student loan people ever live.
Nowadays they're just going to forgive it, right?
I didn't forgive mine.
See, that's the problem with forgiving. That's right. People would get upset.
Yeah.
So you transferred schools to something close to Manhattan?
Yeah.
Where Staten Island?
Staten Island. Okay. So when I first went to New York City, I was terrified. I'm from nowhere. And so I was like, what am I going to do here? So I the first time I went, I parked in New Jersey. I was with my girlfriend at the time. She had actually moved out there with me. And took a ferry to the city because I didn't feel like driving in the city. I'm like, man, I don't know. Like this, I heard this place is crazy. Went in there, had a great time, met Renzo, was amazing. And then immediately started to look, where can I go to school and where would be a good place to live? That was financially something similar to where, and Staten Island was the only answer, right? So Staten Island, found an apartment for like $500 or $600 at the time, little hole in the wall. And I got accepted, and so did she, to the College of Staten Island. So we're like, that's it. We're going to live in Staten Island.
And so you did that, and you just started training?
Yeah, I went there. As soon as I got settled, I went in to train. The first time was like September 6th, 1996. I went in and took my very first class.
And what, like, And did you just go, was this now 7 days a week all in?
No, so it was super expensive. So, but even back then, it was $300 for 14 lessons. That's all the plan they had. So, if you're talking training every day, it would have been like $600 or $700 a month. So I was like, I couldn't afford that. So I got a pack of 14 classes. Went essentially 2 times a week in the beginning, and then shortly after that, they opened an unlimited package. Like in essentially like almost January, they had an unlimited package. Now I didn't do that at first because it was $250 a month, and that was still really expensive for me at the time. This is at a point of the time where I was getting that inventory job to try to make ends meet. I was borrowing money to live from student aid, in school full time, and doing that inventory job. So at night it was like a
inventory
third inventory. Yes, of course. Tuck a buck, buddy. So anyway, they started unlimited, and one of my good friends who was just a little bit above me started training every day. And within a month, he was beating us up so bad. I mean, it was literally like he became a different human being.
And you saw it.
Oh, yeah. I was like, well, I have to do that because you just went from meh to beating me up like I don't know anything. I'm doing the unlimited. So like February of 97, I was training every single day.
And I mean, what is your mindset? Like, what are you looking to accomplish? Are you saying I'm going to be a professional jiu-jitsu practitioner? Like, where did you see yourself taking this?
No, because there was no such thing, right?
No.
So I knew that I really liked it. I just was like, I just want to see how good I can get. I want to be the best that I can be at this particular thing.
I mean, did you say maybe I'll be a mixed martial artist?
There wasn't even hardly that, right? So UFC was like one fight maybe every 3 or 4 months. So at first I was like, yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe I'll just train to fight because I had a striking background. Yeah, let's try that. But I knew like, well, I'm not going to do that for a couple of years because I got to get better at jiu-jitsu before I do anything like that. So there was really no thought of a future except for I love this and I want to pour my heart and soul into this.
Where I was leading is like, when did it dawn on you that you could actually make a career as a coach?
Not even until much later. I mean, when I was a purple belt, right before I
walk the audience through the sequence of belts.
Yeah, so there's white belt when you start, and you generally a white belt for any length of time, can be any length of time. And then there's blue belt is the second adult belt, purple belt then is the third adult belt, brown belt is the fourth, and then you get your black belt, and then it keeps going from there. So when I was late blue belt, I was already training multiple times a day at this point. Renzo gave me my first private client because he was just he was a musician. He said, "Hey, I don't want to train in the normal class. Do you have anybody that do privates?" He was like, "Yeah, that guy, Shawn. You're gonna teach him privates." Okay. I was like, "Okay. I'm just a blue belt here, But I'd already actually won some big tournaments and placed in some of the bigger competitions, and so I started teaching privates there and making $80 an hour, which for a kid from Indiana,
that's good,
dude. Yeah, I was just like, whoa, what is this? So I loved it. I really thought, wow, teaching, this is really great. I really love to share what I'm doing and see this guy getting better. It's pretty amazing. So, but I didn't really start teaching. I started teaching classes at purple belt, but there's still no future in teaching or coaching that I was aware of at that time. So it was still just like, I just love this. I'm going to keep doing it and see where it goes. And I had been starting to compete at that time. So then that's when competition started to become a little bit more, okay, maybe I'm going to fight. Maybe I'm going to compete jiu-jitsu. That sort of started to become more of a reality at that point.
When did you first enter a competition?
White belt. I did my first competition at white belt right before I got my blue belt. I did a tournament, and then back then there were few and far between of that too. I mean, a friend of ours threw a tournament in New York City. That's sort of why I did it, because to support him. And then aside from that, if you wanted to compete, you had to travel. You had to travel to Brazil. You had to the first Pan American Games, or they call them Pans now, was in Florida in '99. Prior to that, there were just Naga and Grappler's Quest, which were the two sort of big boys in the United States. That's kind of where everybody competed. And those were every 3 to 4 months at the most. So you're talking 1 to 3 competitions a year at that time, if you're lucky. So
for a lot of people, I would say almost everybody just naturally, but a lot of people listening, the idea of entering really some form of mixed martial arts, some form of violence, standing across from another man and going one-on-one, right, is a very, it's a very serious thing. Like it brings them a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. Walk us through that first time, that first competition you ever did, and what was going through your head, and you know, just how you overcame those feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I was nervous, especially like the white belt one was kind of like not quite fair. The first one that I did as a blue belt, I think, was about 7 months into my training. That was more, I kind of knew a little bit more of what I wanted to do and what I was doing. So I was nervous. Like really nervous. As a matter of,
what are you nervous about?
at that time, I don't even think I knew why I was nervous. I think it was like jitters of what's going to happen. I think the biggest fear was am I going to lose, right? Am I going to lose this thing, or what am I going to do? And that was compounded by that tournament. We had it in a mall. It was all my friends. It was in Philly. So all my friends from New York drove down to Philly. So there's a big group of us from Renzo's. And there was one guy in like a Taekwondo red gi. And my coach was Renzo, but there was a brown belt at the gym at the time named Vinny. And Vinny looked at all of us and said, if anyone loses to that guy in the red gi, you're walking home to New York City.
Red gis aren't.
The red gi. At that time, there was no red gis. So everyone knew that this was not a jiu-jitsu guy. It's like anybody. And guess who I got the first match?
The red gi.
Red gi guy. And I was like, yeah, but unfortunately, I arm locked him like 30 seconds. But it probably was because I was like, I got to perform here. I'm gonna be walking home. I was nervous to lose, I think, more so than anything, but I had no pressure. There was no pressure except for that. So it was a little different than when I competed later, where there was actually self-induced pressure. So I think early on, it was just like, am I going to win or lose? I don't know. And that was early pressure. As I started to compete more into my blue belt, the pressure changed a little bit to what if I'm attacking this guy, what if he's going to counter me during the move? So it was actually micro. It went into like a micro level of like, well, if I do this move, what if he does this?
So like a paralysis by analysis.
Correct. Yes, correct.
So different.
Correct. And I think that's always sort of one of the best things about my mind, and that yin yang. One of the best, one of the worst. One of the best. I'm highly analytical and like will boil everything down to the minutia, but that can also be your worst enemy too. And so I think in some of those environments. That's what I would be nervous about. If I'm going to do this, what if he does this? And then, most of the time it went okay because I had a coach telling me what to do. Thankfully, good coaching. But yeah, I think that's what the fear became.
So was most of the time Renzo at these competitions with you?
Yeah,
and he's talking to you while the match is going on.
Correct. It was either. Almost always it was Renzo in the beginning, and then sometimes, very rarely, he has showed up at every one of our competitions, with the exception of very few. But then in the corner too, then I would have Matt, Serra, Ricardo Almeida, and Rodrigo Gracie. So that's
so I wanted to. So Renzo, not only being a famous mixed martial artist specifically in BJJ, but he's also trained and coached a lot. Like, share some of the names that you grew up with in his academy. Yeah.
So the three big ones that were also, I consider my instructors and coaches were Matt Serra, Ricardo Almeida, and Rodrigo Gracie. Ricardo was the senior of the three in the beginning. So he was the first one to get the black. He was a brown belt when he came, got his black belt when he was training there. Matt and Rodrigo were both just barely under Ricardo as far as rank goes, but they were all three just killers on the mat, and also incredibly gifted as teachers and sort of coaches as well. So we trained every day together. So, Renzo would train with us when he was getting ready for competitions, but my daily training partners were those three. A good friend of mine who we were colleagues named John Danaher. He and I taught together, got our black belts on the same day. We were, best buddies and colleagues. And then there was a slew of other people who would come. So Renzo's brother, Shawn Gracie, would come all the time. Half Gracie, his other brother, would come from time to time. We had world champions coming in all the time that were either friends of Renzo's, students of Renzo's, or just wanted to come up into that environment and get great training. So it was a really special place early on, and it just stayed that way. So, because I would call myself first generation, and that first generation before Renzo really didn't teach as much, was very special. It was a very special environment. And that's kind of where George St. Pierre came into. All of these fighters would come in, test themselves, so to speak, and just be like, what the hell's going on here? This is something completely different. So, yeah.
And so you grew up competing against these guys in practice.
Yeah.
And then you go to the tournaments. Would you, in some ways, find those almost easier than the competition?
Well, the tournament, I think I was my own worst enemy in many competitions.
Why?
I would be too nervous. I would get in my own way. I would so early on, it really didn't happen very often. I was in great shape. I had no pressure except for self-induced pressure of like, I don't want to lose. But I didn't know how to fire myself up. That was the nice guy, right? So most of the performance that I had where I was at my best, I was either someone either did something to invoke that human that exists in there, or it was I had to sort of have fun in the environment, because competing was never fun for me. I wasn't a born fighter. It's something that I believe I had to work on and still need to work on, unless the stakes are high enough, unless there's threat. I always have been this person where if there's no real threat, that the monster doesn't really turn on, I guess you could say. So some of my best performances were where people would do dirty tactics, or if I was losing, and then all of a sudden I'd be like, dude, I'm losing. I can't lose. I gotta wake up. And so yeah, it's still different.
But what were you? It sounds like you were very nervous. Were you nervous of like letting your Renzo down or the gym down?
No, I think it was not letting anyone down. I think because I didn't think about it enough. So I feel like nervous energy for me was because I had no real reason to compete. There was no inner, like, I never had a conversation like, why are you doing this? So there was no money. Medals didn't matter to me. Like yeah, sure, you win a medal around your neck. That great. And my goal was to be the best in the world. I really wanted to be the best jiu-jitsu guy on the planet. And when we had all these people come in on a somewhat regular basis, and we would get to see world champions. So there'd be world champions that were above me, brown belt, black belt. They would come into the gym when I was blue, purple, brown, black, and I'd crush most of them, to be really honest. I mean, all of us would crush these guys. And so competing didn't really validate the fact that
you already knew.
Yeah.
To some degree.
Yeah. There was already like, well, in training, this guy's trying to kill me. There's no time limits. There's no points. You're trying to kill me and I'm going to finish you. And it would go until we finished each other, right? Mm-hmm. So it was pretty clear to see, like really easy to see, like I can finish almost every single person that ever came in the gym, with the exception of very few. And so that was sort of validated what my goal was. And so I never really had that conversation. And it's something I tell my competitors all the time, like, hey, you better know why you're competing, because if it's not important, no matter what the reason, if it's not important enough, when you get out there, you're not going to be your best. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing, and it better be important.
Did you and Renzo ever go at it?
In training wise, but I mean, he was always better than me, like a lot better. He's a special individual, and I always felt
you never once submitted or tapped him.
No, but I never as I got better, I never rolled with him in that fashion because I looked up to him. He's just very,
Yeah,
even though I think, he would today, if we trained, he'd probably smack me if he felt like I was taking it easy, he'd probably like, hey, what are you doing? Like, I need to be pushed. I want to be pushed. I like challenges, but I just never really, he was always very, very, very good. I mean, that guy, when he wants to train and he just give him a few weeks to get back in shape, oh my Lord, he had a special mind for jiu-jitsu.
What was maybe the biggest moment in your career as a jiu-jitsu competitor? Like whether it's a tournament you won, or maybe even a loss.
I think probably there were I don't know if I had a competition that I would say was as meaningful as the fact that it would define how I would think later. So I was bronze medal in Pans at the black belt level. I still felt like I in no way, shape, or form performed as well as I could. Probably the match that stood out the most to me was a single match that I lost, but it was Renzo came and told me afterwards that was his favorite match he'd ever seen. For me, it wasn't particular because I was just going. I was just it was a fella named Gabriel Gonzaga. The guy fought in the UFC. He was a giant human. He was a very skilled giant human being. It was my first black belt match in the open weight at the World Championships in 2002. And I fought for my life. I mean, I tried every single thing on that guy that I could. I fought sort of open-ended. There was no nerves. I almost finished him. He beat me at the very end. He put me in an Ezekiel as time ran out, but I was tapping as time ran out because I was exhausted, and there was a point discrepancy. There was no way I was going to get back to. But I always say, oh, okay, I was finished. But Renzo came in immediately afterwards and said, that's my favorite match I've ever seen you do in my life. And I didn't really understand because I lost. I was really pissed. I was not a good loser. I was pissed. I went in the bathroom. I was pissed off, and it just didn't take that loss very well because I was in great shape. And I knew who this guy was. That's one thing. He was 30 kilos heavier than me. He's 104 kilos. I was 74 kilos. So he's a big human. I went out afterwards and I watched what he did to everyone else after that. And so then that made me feel a little bit better. And then at dinner, it made me feel a lot better when he stated that he lost in the semifinals to the guy who won. And he said to Renzo, your little guy was the reason I lost. I ran out of juice. I ran out of squeeze. I had this guy in a submission. He's like, that little guy was one of the best guys I've ever fought in competition ever. And so that made me feel like, well, at least I'm on the right track. feel a little bit better. But I've had lots of memorable competition experiences, and both good and bad. And I think it just, if you are in tune, it can shape you for later. For my coaching now, shapes me.
And so when did you realize you were, and maybe it was a gradual because it sounded like it just kind of happened organically, but becoming a coach, and that was going to be your career? Yeah,
I think I've always liked teaching. I like to teach people. I like to be analytical, and then I minored in coaching in college. So there was a minor, and I've always just had a deep appreciation for leadership, for what coaches can do, and then on top of it, try to be an exceptional instructor, because I think all three of those are very different. Coach, instructor, and leader are very different individuals, and so I've always just enjoyed it. And so it's just one of the things that I think organically has come out to be one of my favorites is teaching people, changing people, and then now trying to get some people to the highest levels.
And so what had to happen for you to become a full-time coach? Did you have to go open up your own gym? Like how did the decision to leave New York happen?
That's a great question. At the time, I was teaching privates full-time. So I was teaching enough privates to live. I was still competing because I enjoyed it. There just weren't many competitions to do. Even back then, I mean, this was 2004. There just was not. I did the Worlds. I had to travel to Brazil every year, which is great. Pans was the only big tournament. Pans was in the States. Worlds were in Brazil. Those are the two biggest tournaments of the world. Aside from that, ADCC, I did trials for that. Lost it. I got third and lost to a champion in a really close match at the end in 2003. But and I wrestled in college, which we didn't really discuss. But I think it was all organic, just because I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I enjoyed teaching, and I guess I got good at it, decent. You know, something I really love.
And so, how'd you end up in LA, right?
Yeah. So at that time, I was just making ends meet. I was at a place where Renzo's was growing. I had managed it. I had helped it grow. And then a friend of mine was moving to LA and said, "Hey, you should really go to LA instead of school." And I had a guy lined up to, for me to teach at. And I was like, well, I asked Renzo, what do you think about LA? He's like, "Oh man, I love LA." He's like, I said, what would you think if I went there and moved there? Because they had some guys coming up from Brazil. Renzo's cousins had just moved into New York City. So I was like, well, this place will be fine if I'm going. I was one of the main teachers there at Renzo. So I was like, well, this place is going to be fine. There's lots of talented people come to take over. So why not? So I went. The weather was insane. I did a Pan Am's in Santa Barbara in 2003. Checked out LA and was like, wow, the weather's really nice here. And so the following year, near the end of 2004, I just left and moved to LA said, "Renzo, is it okay if I go?" He's like, "Yeah, I'd love that. You should start, spread the brand out there, man."
So you started Renzo Gracie Los Angeles?
Yeah. So this would be a whole episode all by itself. But the fun thing about this podcast, because there's so much mindset stuff. I mean, I had a really rough baseball coaching experience, but business wise is sort of a business mindset. But I've never. This is the first time I've ever done a show like this. But I actually went out there, and typical LA style. The guy that had said, "I have 10 people ready to go. You can use my dad's karate school in West Hollywood," just flaked, right? Yeah. So I went out there with 10 students. I thought, like, hey, cool, that'll at least pay my rent. I moved out there with $636 in my bank account, by the way. I had $636 in my bank account going like, what the hell am I about to do, But I thought, hey, I have 10 kids ready, so that's my rent. I'll be able to rent something great. To get out there, and this guy, this sketchy dude, is like, hey, yeah, man, I didn't know. My friend even was like, why are you going to LA? From LA, right? Why are you going to LA? I'm like, come on, man, that's not fair. That's not fair. So those people, this guy was like, hey, let's practice today at 6. Tomorrow, let's skip tomorrow and do this. I'm like, I can't do that. I have to be consistent. We have to be consistent. So I ended up going around this kid's back and talking to his dad, who owned the karate school, and he didn't know who I was from Adam. So I was like, oh, this isn't good. So that fell right on its face. Luckily, one of my very good friends named Gene Dunn had a very good friend out there named Brian Rockbuck, and he had a sort of a Krav Maga. It's not Krav Maga, but it's a combat school called Elite Training Center in Redondo Beach. And he was wonderful. I mean, they saved my hide. He was like, hey, you want to teach kickboxing here and start your own program? And I'm like, dude, yes, 100%.
Yeah, anything.
Yeah, so that went off, and then a friend of mine that I had taught, an actor, had a school called Hollywood Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he had asked me to take it over. So there were no students left. His coach apparently left. So I said, yeah, sure. I would love to take that over. I got this was in West Hollywood, right next to Barry's Boot Camp, the first ever Barry's Boot Camp, and I took it over. Under the guidance that, hey, he said, hey, I'll give you 90% if I can hold 10%. That'd be great, just for nostalgia purposes. I started this thing. Fine, no problem. That ended up to be a complete disaster. Like, I got screwed. Yeah, really badly. So I learned a whole lot. I mean, I grew that place up to where we needed to get out, and it was just crowded.
Yeah, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, now you're learning business Jiu-Jitsu.
That's correct.
It's different.
I was a white belt at business. And then this guy was not, or who was around him was not. And so So that was a hard lesson, and that took me out of there. So that was from 2005 to 2010. I grew that school. I was ready to move it. So many crazy things happened there. I think he just literally thought, he just went crazy. I mean, for all intents and purposes, went a little bit nuts. What was going on in his life? He thought, I think he thought that I was going to just leave, which was nonsense. And then, so that ended really bad. And so I just went and opened, what was then Renzo Los Angeles. It was always Renzo Los Angeles. It was just, I always called it that underneath the side, but then my gym, I renamed it 5 Star Martial Arts Renzo Los Angeles and opened that.
And is that something you asked for his permission to use his name? And does he get like a royalty or something?
Correct. I paid him a royalty. Not that he asked. I just thought that was the right thing to do.
And are there other Gracies in LA? Like, wait, who's this guy with the Gracie name? And
there were very few, actually. I mean, they were in deep Southern California, Torrance, like down below Redondo Beach, and none in my area. So there were a lot of jiu-jitsu schools, but there were no. There were Machado brothers. They were in the Valley. They were cousins of the Gracies. But that was really irrelevant to me. I just thought, hey, this is where I'm going to go.
And so then you started building a gym?
Yeah, built Hollywood Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu up to be like 130, 140 students in a less than a 2,000 square foot. But I mean, my place now is small. That place was really small. I started in 1,000 square foot, broke out the wall next to us, took over that space, and then we needed to move again because it was so small.
What lessons have you learned in running a business and compare it to actual Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Like, how are there similarities and how are the differences?
I think that's what's the coolest thing about Jiu-Jitsu, that I think, guys like yourself, I think find, and that the mental process that you have to put into problem solving and changing and fighting these people on the mats, like it really translates into like every single thing that you do. It's like for real chess with yourself.
It's human chess.
It's human chess, and it's dynamic problem solving. And I think once you learn the fundamentals of business, then it's, which I'm not a black belt by any stretch of the imagination, but then you become a great dynamic problem solver, which is what you need to pivot on things and try things. I failed. That didn't work. Okay, let's go in a different way. And so I think they marry each other quite well. The benefits that come out of jiu-jitsu if you're really in tune with running a business, your life in general, et cetera, et cetera.
What I really like about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as it relates to businesses, in my experience in business, is you're going to make 1,000 decisions a day, but like you're going to make thousands of decisions, and there is a 0% chance everyone is right. And realistically, you're going to make a lot of decisions that aren't correct, and they don't have to be drastic decisions that massively negatively impact your business. It could be, that wasn't the right decision. It could be something that's very small and immaterial. But what I like about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is really the only way to get better is to compete and to train. And you're going to tap or get choked out, depending how quickly you tap. And you're definitely going to tap with an arm or leg lock, you hope, a million times. And when you tap, you don't go, man, I just lost. That's so demoralizing. You're like, oh yeah, it's totally normal. And you move on. You say, okay, what did I do wrong? How do I fix it? How do I get better? But I think people are so afraid of failure. And in theory, tapping or getting an arm or leg lock is a failure. You lost that competition. But in jiu-jitsu, it's so prevalent. It happens so often, and really is almost impossible to get better without tapping a lot. Because that means if you're not tapping, you're not pushing yourself. At least that's what I tell me when I go 0-20 in your competition class. But that's what I tell myself. But in business, you're gonna, in theory, tap or get locked a lot, and so you just pivot quick and say, okay, what am I going to do differently next time? All right, got it, go.
Yeah, and that's right, and that's where, working with you, we approach jiu-jitsu a lot different with you than I would necessarily someone else, because you're able, you have a pretty unique ability to learn on the fly through problem solving, and I think it's worked the other way as well. You problem solve a ton, and you make all these decisions, and then you can reflect on what happened, ask interesting questions, and we could continue. But I think you're absolutely right. Is if you're in tune with it, because sometimes people are not, right, and that's where, as a great instructor and coach, you want people to be in tune with what they're doing and reflect on their training, not just come in and do the same thing over and over and over and over. You want them to understand how to reflect on what you're doing, what went wrong, how to solve it. If you don't know how to solve it, you ask and you get the information, and then you try it again, try it again, try it again, until miraculously one day you're like, oh wow, now I'm the one giving all the problems.
I got it.
That's it.
No, that's how it works, and you don't feel like you're making progress. You don't feel like you're making progress. You don't feel like you're making progress. And then one day you're like, man, I've made a lot of progress.
Yeah.
And it's weird how that happens.
And I think I've done a lot of martial arts, and I believe that jiu-jitsu is unique. That is a unique thing. I don't think it happens in kickboxing at that level. I don't think it happens at even wrestling at that level. Wrestling, I think it will. Grappling arts, I think it happens a lot more than anything else. But when there's a finite ending, which is a submission to jiu-jitsu, I think that makes it even much more plausible that you can learn that much more.
And you would know much more than I, but in striking, it could be one mistake, split second, and you're unconscious. Life isn't so much like that.
No.
In jiu-jitsu, by the time you're tapping, there's been 6 things in sequence that you either did or didn't do that led to that. And so I found business to be much more like that. It's not like, oh, I made this one decision and it instantly decimated what I was here to accomplish. It's usually a sequence of things that leads up to it, and that's jiu-jitsu. Again, it's very much, it's like a puzzle / like you said, chess. It's really unique like that.
Yeah, I agree.
And so you're in Los Angeles. How and why do you end up in Nashville?
So we met my wife. Actually, she got me, actually. Like she was, I met her at Barry's boot camp. She came in, that's what one of the most impressive things about my wife is she came and picked me up in a room full of dudes, which I was like, wow, that's impressive. I'm going to go out with you.
You feel good about that.
I do. She came in, she was very assertive. So like, all right, well, yeah, we're going to go out. Anyway, we led to having a family, our first son. And when we were, I guess, even about to have him, the idea of, this is not a family place. Like Los Angeles is not a place where I care to raise my kid. So we started to think about it then. And then I opened another school, and that took a lot of time, took a lot more time than it should have. And so we were just a little bit late getting out of Nashville than what we had, out of LA than we had planned. So but we still left. We were like, hey, we're out of here. I sold the school in Los Angeles. We actually did a short stint in New York because my wife always wanted to live in New York. And that was 6 months. And then we came to Nashville once her realization was very quick about like, yeah, New York is not a place where I want to raise my
it's different
kids either. So
for different reasons.
Yes, correct.
When was this?
That was in 2019. Right at the end of 2019, when we decided, hey, December 2019, we said, hey, my son got very sick. We were in the ICU, and we were like, yeah, we both looked at each other together. We're like, we're leaving. So I hopped on a plane in January, sold my business in Los Angeles to come here. And I came and rented a house, and we were.
How'd you choose Nashville?
Her choice. She always loved Nashville. We came and visited several times. Starting in 2014.
I'm sure you looked at the jiu-jitsu landscape.
Correct. I looked at demographics, what's going on here with jiu-jitsu, what's going on with the city, and thought, well, this city seems to be close enough to family and the right place to really explode and potentially get to some of what my gigantic, enormous goals are.
Yeah, so tell me about those.
I mean, they're giant. I have some giant goals for both academies, jiu-jitsu as far as competitors, fighters, and just trying to continue to revolutionize how jiu-jitsu is played. Through all of my experience with wrestling, because I've got a lot of experience with wrestling and striking, and I try to make a jiu-jitsu that's a little bit different than the norm. And so I've seen it perform at the highest levels through, Gordon and Gary and guys that I've worked with. And so now it's about creating sort of my own killers, so to speak. In that as well, spread out the brand through academies and create some really high-level, fun professional fighters.
And so, and would that would include, let's call it, was it a fight center? Is it a training center?
Yeah. So that's sort of one of the next big goals is to create a big, huge fight center that we can get several of these programs put together. So essentially, it makes not only it great for the community because jiu-jitsu is great for jiu-jitsu and wrestling, great for the community. I mean, they're great for kids, great for the community. So is kickboxing, brings really like the female element into the mix much easier than jiu-jitsu. So for the community, for sure, I think that's sort of like, I think that just happens when you have great people at the top. But then a fight center to develop literally the highest level of athlete that I think is possible, which is going to take time.
And so what are you focusing on right now?
Right now we're focusing on efficiency in business. So getting all systems in business so that they run very efficiently and making a business that's also not only the most fun for people, but will change people's lives. And then underneath that, which is sort of my primary focus, because I don't like to say that community is not people are not they're always my primary focus. But underneath that is to create a plethora of exceptionally high-level coaches and instructors and help turn them into leaders, because that's, again, I think that's different. And then create an exceptionally high-level group of competitors that sort of can go out and show what's happening here.
Are you looking to attract those coaches and competitors today?
Both. I haven't even tried to recruit anyone. Right now, we're just building them in-house, but I think that's sort of a product that will happen organically once I start getting out there more, and once people start to see what's going on as these guys, essentially, quote unquote, grow up in the competition environment. I think people will start to say, "Oh, what's going on over there?" That's pretty cool.
Let me ask you about people who, and maybe it was at Renzo's in New York, but grew up and became top competitors. You mentioned Matt Serra. When I first started watching the UFC, he was at his peak, and I saw the fight where he did knock out George St. Pierre, and then I saw George come back and beat him, right? Yeah. And both of those guys are your buddies, so that must have been interesting, right?
Yes.
So what have you seen? Both as what have you experienced as a competitor, but more importantly, you've seen as a coach or a friend or a teammate of some of these best in the world combat mixed martial artists in terms of their mindsets. Like, what was a common characteristic or trait that, look, because Matt Serra's actual fighting style was very different than George's, and George's very different than maybe Renzo's or any of the UFC fighters today. But what was maybe a common experience when you're around them from a mentality standpoint?
And that's the interesting thing. I think they all have different mindsets. So Renzo, he just loved challenges. I mean, like, you put a challenge around that guy and he is taking it. There's just no way for him not to accept any sort of challenge. And I think that he is a very unique mind like that. But I don't necessarily think that he was a consummate professional in the training environment, because he really just like, let's go. It's just anytime, anywhere, let's go. Matt Serra had that same sort of let's go anytime, anywhere. But then, I mean, that guy trained all day, every day, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours a day, but also loved fighting, which is, I think that's why he went so far in the sport, and he accomplished his main goal, which I always think, like, goals are sort of weird. How if you set a goal and you accomplish it, sometimes it's like, that's it, cool, man, I'm good. Winning the UFC title was his main goal, and he had said that from the beginning. I mean, that's what he wanted to do, and that's what he did it. George, I feel like, is unique to all of those, because he doesn't like to fight. Fighting wasn't really what he wanted to do. I like that. That wasn't what motivated him to get into the ring. Was to fight some conflict. Was not what he liked. He was a very kind individual. But he was also an exemplary model of what a professional athlete should be. Never missed a training day. Could have gone out until 4 a.m. and he'd show up to training.
Crazy discipline.
It's so disciplined. Like that guy is like the perfect martial artist. Like discipline. And then going into an environment where he wasn't really comfortable, but like excelled in a highly uncomfortable environment. And I think that's where that is unique for him, was like that's what it's like, wow, his mindset was totally different.
What were some of these guys like before a fight in the locker room?
George notoriously was a mess. Getting sick, vomiting, just didn't want to be there, would question why he was there. Yeah. That was somewhat to a lesser degree of like how I sort of was. Yeah. So I found like he's a very unique case where being able to go through there, and then once you step in the cage, it's all gone. He's ready. Where like Matt Serra and was excited. He's excited to be there. Like, man, let's go. Let's get ready to rock and roll. Where like Renzo would go to sleep. It's just like, this is another day at the office, man. I mean, I'm going to take a nap and then just walk out there and do my thing because I just love it. It's just natural. So, 3 entirely different people. One that could go to sleep up until like being woken up to go out there and fight. One that was very excited to be like, let's throw hands and let's get dirty. And then the other one where it's like, I really don't want to be here, but then excel in all 3 of them.
In watching all of those fighters, but I want to focus on kind of the George St. Pierre pre-fight where you're nervous and you don't have to be actually throwing up, but like mentally, you're probably going through your head everything that could go wrong. That's probably why you're so nervous. What advice, after having watched them and maybe some of this yourself, what advice would you have for the audience? Again, they don't have to be going out to actually fight someone in a cage. Okay, that is the extreme. Yep. But who's nervous to the point that they're almost paralyzed by their fear, whatever that fear is of starting a business or asking someone out on a date or whatever it is in life that somebody wants to do, but for whatever reason their kind of reptilian brain and their nerves is overwhelming their desire to do something. Like what have you seen people done to overcome that, or what have you personally done?
Yeah. So number one, I think you have to make sure what you're about to do is worth it. So it's got to be the most important thing in your life at that particular moment. Because I think if it's not, then you're going to cower. You're going to be like, well, that's not worth it. I'm going to stop there, or I'm not going to do this, or you're not going to do what you need to do in the heat of the moment. You may not do what you need to do, and you may doubt yourself. It's said that Fedor Emelianenko, they ask him, why does he fight? And how is he so calm and then so brutal? And he's like, well, you're essentially stealing my kid's food, and I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's like that's pretty high level. But I've always found, for me, that was the lacking, was I didn't have that in competition. There wasn't a single thing that I said, this is why I'm going to go through all of the hardships. But for jiu-jitsu itself, I wanted to be the very best, and it was that important for me to go through. I mean, I broke my jaw, I dislocated. I've had so many injuries, and nothing stopped me from being to the level that I was, because it was that important. It's the most important thing I ever did at that time. And so I think that's first and foremost, is it has to be important enough to go through the deepest, darkest times or in your mind that you can possibly imagine. The second is you need to be prepared. So whatever preparation that might be, so for fighting, physical preparation is of the utmost importance. Physical preparation is the number one thing that you must have in all athletic endeavors. Once you qualify that this is the most important thing when you get out there, because you're as prepared as you possibly can be, then you can lean back on all your training. I'm a big believer that if something isn't that important and you can't identify why it's that important, no matter how much you trained, you could take the foot off the gas and just say, yeah, this really isn't worth it.
Especially the second it gets hard.
The second it gets hard. I found that those things are really what can push people through the hardest times in their life. I mean, not to continue to talk, but I
You're
was
the guest. You can talk as long as you want.
Well, I was married. I got married in New York to my high school sweetheart. We got divorced because we grew apart. That was an immensely difficult time for me as emotionally, but ultimately, why? Because jiu-jitsu was more important. Like getting to be that, and that sounds sick, right? But it was. I went there for that. I went to do that. It pushed me to stay there and go through that difficult time. I continued to train. I continued to keep it was difficult. It was a very, very difficult time. But I stayed focused. I was prepared. And it got me out of that difficult time and then I moved on to it with the rest of my life. And I was like, wow, that's it. And like I had told you, I've been injured. My jaw was my teeth were pointed straight forward. I've had some really crazy things that I've just gone through, and I didn't think anything about it because it was it was that important to me. It was that important to me. Same in business when I made a school, especially when I had that first setback. It became, for different reasons, not only my own reasons, but for my coaches that were underneath me, to stay in LA. I didn't have to stay in LA. I could have left and went anywhere, but I stayed there, reopened the school, reinvigorated myself, went through a bunch of like living in a hotel for a while, like a whole bunch of things that were exceptionally difficult, but it was very important to me to do what I was doing. So.
And you kind of answered this next question, but I'll ask it again anyway, is what is the biggest reason, whether it's in jiu-jitsu or professionally speaking, you see people not experience the results they want?
Because they don't push through those times. We talk about this. I mean, I think people need to understand that to be the highest level of everything, with exception of being lucky, right? Financially, you can get as lucky as you want, but that doesn't mean you're going to stay up there. To get to the highest level of anything that takes skill, you have to have perseverance and you have to work more, much, much, much more than you may ever think that you have to work. And if you do, and you put the hours in, and you have some wherewithal, then the sky's the limit. As long as you are like, I'm doing this, I love this, I'm going to go through it, I'm going to work as hard as I can, put the hours in, and persevere through all of the worst times that could happen in your life, then at the end of the day, I'm pretty certain that people get their hand raised.
Getting your hand raised is the ultimate measure of success in a competition, but how do you measure success with your students?
Through growth, because I'm in the mindset that I don't care if people lose. I really don't care. We're in a growth phase in my school. We're still quote unquote very young in the competition circuit. We're I think the longest guy that I've had in the cycle that's the most serious is Mac, and he's just been with me for, I don't even know, not even 3 years yet.
Big Mac.
Yeah, that's it. And so growth is exceptionally important, that they are continuing to develop their skill sets through this pressure, win or lose. I mean, win or lose, we still fix things. We still look at things. We still have a long way to go. These guys are going to perform at the highest levels in the world-class environments at the highest levels. We're not talking about just highest level of blue, purple, brown, but we're talking about the highest levels, period. And if they can continue to grow and be happy with that, then I think that's success.
How would you describe, like, it's hard to be accurate in your self-assessments, but like, looking back on your career, both as a competitor and now as a coach, like, how would you describe your mentality?
Consistently working and persistent. I think it changes all the time. I'm of one that feels like I need to get better all the time. So I'm trying to learn new things all the time in any sort of way, shape, or form that will allow me to be better at what I do. That's just something I think I've always done. And this is where coming to where hiring help for us. because I've felt like I'm not able to give the time necessary for that, because it takes time to really work on those things. And so this will be a very exciting future about to happen for me here, and I think for everyone that's involved, is that it will allow me to redevote the time that I used to put in LA to work on that business. That had 600 students, was immensely successful, the gym, and I made some incredible coaches there because that was the focus then. And so I'm excited to see what can happen when I have a different mind. I'm older, I'm a little bit wiser, a little bit of a different...
You're a brown belt now in business, maybe black belt?
Yeah, but I don't know about that one. I'm still learning. You're teaching me. I need to learn more from the people who can teach me. And so I'm excited to see what happens, because putting the time in a different way, and even with competitors and coaches, putting time into a different way, I think it will be really fun for me to see what happens.
Well, I'm excited to watch. I'm excited to experience it. I get the benefit of coming and seeing you a couple of times a week.
Yeah.
Once they just switched football practice to the morning, so once that's over in 2 weeks, I could get back to the morning classes. But I've always told Shawn and the guys at the gym, like especially the fighters, I said, man, I just want to be, like that sixth guy at the rink. Like nobody, you remember Mark Zuckerberg? He was sitting there.
Yeah.
You remember they just kept handing things. He was trying to hand. So I want to be your fighter's Mark Zuckerberg. I just want to be the guy who's kind of like, why is he there? And like, what does he do? And nobody really knows the answer.
Yeah.
I'm just like the hype man. All right.
Yeah. Let's go.
So I can't thank you enough for everything you taught me, and I have a lot more to learn, clearly. But I can't thank you enough for coming on, Shawn. I really enjoyed this.
Well, the feeling is mutual. I can't thank you enough for the things that you've taught me, buddy. And it's a pleasure to see you grow on the mats all the time.
All right, my man.
Yeah, thank you.
See you.
Yeah.